I listen to and watch Jon Stewart's podcast all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it occurred to me relatively recently that I don't experience Jon Stewart differently when he's sitting on the Daily Show set, which is like beautiful and cared for, and he's wearing makeup and it's a whole thing, versus his podcast shot, which he's too close to the
Mm-hmm.
camera. The camera's not very good, but it's like that's still Jon Stewart. I don't experience those two people differently. And I think if I'm Netflix or any of these other companies, I'm looking at this being like, why in God's name am I spending all of this money on the set
Right.
and the makeup and the crew and the whole thing when actually all I need is Jon Stewart and a webcam?
Exactly, and that's the machine logic of how Netflix would approach the question, right? Like, how do I get the same amount of money, if not more money, with by spending less money? And podcasts and this entire sort of growing culture of like, let's call it reduce expectations around labor input is, a big sort of dynamic that we should be sort of thinking about this along these lines. Because you're right. If you don't think about everything else but engagement time, then yes, it makes a ton of sense that like we shouldn't really care that we can see Jon Stewart's nose hair in the visual, right? There is maybe very little difference between time spent watching something like Bill Simmons' podcast or, a Jon Stewart, podcast situation versus throwing on 4 hours of Bridgerton. In some senses, the outcome is the same. They're driving the same metric, which is subscription and at some point advertising.